Hello, friends! Welcome back to another episode of Hmong Women Thriving. Friends, today's episode is really exciting. I'm so honored to be joined by Naree Thao, founder of Untangled Minds LLC. Naree is a licensed bilingual bicultural therapist based in Wisconsin. Whoop whoop. Midwest represent. As a first generation immigrant, Naree has faced challenges ranging from generational trauma and discrimination to navigating academia as a Southeast Asian woman. Her journey through perinatal mental health and parenting neurodivergent children have shaped her deep passion for helping others find healing through their own stories. Through her private practice and community initiatives like the Virtual Self Love Group for Girls, Naree creates compassionate, culturally responsive spaces that inspire growth, resilience, and connection. So, in this episode, we're going to be exploring her journey into mental health, her advocacy for women and parents, and how she's building a safe space for the next generation of Hmong girls. So, Naree, thank you so much for joining me today. Can you start by sharing a little bit about, your background and what led you into the field of mental health?
Yeah, well, I just want to take a moment very quickly to thank you, Ariel, for inviting me to be a part of the Hmong Woman Thriving podcast. And it's such an honor to be here and to share this space with you because it's so admirable on your end to be doing all the things that you're doing and to uplift and amplify the voices of Hmong women to share this space as a healing space for many of us, right? So it's such gratitude on my end to be part of this journey with you. And so thank you. And hopefully what I share today would resonate with listeners and viewers as well. Yeah. So to answer your question in terms of, a little bit about my background and what led me to the field of mental health is that I've been working in the mental health field for 13 years now. And out of those 13 years, for 8 years, I have been fully licensed as a licensed professional counselor in the state of Wisconsin. I am also the founder of Untangled Minds, as you mentioned, which is a mental health practice here in Menasha, Wisconsin, that serves ages 13 and up with presenting concerns such as understanding and managing symptoms of depression and anxiety, anger management, grief loss, and really a complex layers of life challenges that individuals come through my therapy space for. And as you also already just mentioned, I am also certified as a perinatal mental health therapist as well, which really just refers to a person's emotional and psychological well-being during pregnancy and in the year following childbirth. So I support a lot of parents, especially new parents, going through the unique challenges of, sleep deprivation, identity changes, and adjusting to the demands of caring for a newborn. So that is kind of the work that I'm doing nowadays. What led me into the mental health field was what I thought led me into the field of mental health was my deep struggles navigating my identity in a bicultural world. And what that just meant was during my worldview growing up and transitioning into young adulthood, especially in the academic systems in my college years, was that there was this complexity of growing up between two cultures and never quite feeling like I belong in either worlds. And I had a difficult time finding resources for students of color like myself, and I had a hard time looking for like a therapist that looked like me and could fully show up and understand my the extent of my experience. So I knew there was a problem, and that problem needed to be solved, and that led me then into the helping field. And I chose counseling because I really wanted more of an intimate space to really talk and explore some of those challenges and vulnerabilities, right? And so that's what led me into the counseling field, for the specialization. So for a very long time, I thought that, like I said, what I thought led me to the mental health field was my experience navigating a bicultural identity, which was a real experience, not dismissing that. But as I've done more inner work and more of my own self discovery, because being a therapist also means that I really, really need to dive deep and connect with my own wounds and my own trauma and whatnot in order for me to do no harm in my therapy space with my clients. So with that, I realized that there was definitely much more deeper depth to my healing work and why I'm doing the work that I'm doing. And there was something that I hadn't fully connected with, and that was a personal tragedy that I experienced when I was a young child. And before I go into that story, I just want to preface that it might be triggering for listeners, and I am not going to share deep details of what had happened just to preserve the privacy of my family and, to protect the details of what had occurred. But I just wanted to lightly share about why that matters and why my story is an important part of my journey. So when I was 7 years old, I had lost my little sister, and it was a result of intentional homicide because she was murdered and she was only 5. And it was a tragedy that my family didn't have the tools or the language to process. So we didn't really process, right? We just knew we had to survive, but through silence. And I watched my parents be interviewed by local news. And I remember how that public attention felt like another layer of exposure on top of just that deep grief that we were experiencing. And when you think of being a 7 year old child, at least for my worldview, I was only able to understand that something bad has happened, but I also was not yet fully mature to fully process or cope with the emotions involved. And I just remember the deep sadness that my parents carried on their faces. And that kind of grief doesn't just go away either, it just kind of goes underground. And for me, I believe that pain, it really just kind of lived in my unconscious state in my mind while quietly shaping how I saw the world, how I connected with other people, how I felt my sense of safety through different lifespans that I was going through. And I really felt like perhaps this, specific experience that went through, pulled me in the direction of doing healing work for others. So while I entered the mental health field thinking that I really wanted to work on my cultural identity, which was valid, it was actually this like unconscious grief that this early loss that I experienced really gave me more meaning and more depth to make sense of my experience and how I connect with other people. And I really think that that's true for many of us, right? Is that sometimes we are often guided by stories that we haven't really fully told ourselves yet, and that kind of leads us in certain directions until we discover more of ourselves and, embracing that. So now you might wonder why I'm sharing this personal tragedy without like showing much like visible emotions. And I also want to share that, this is a story that has been told many times throughout my journey in many different ways throughout my journey as well. Not because I, initiate by simply sharing to people about what happened, right? I don't just go up to people and share stories about what happened to me, or I'm not seeking empathy from other individuals. It's a lot from because people either have heard the story or have been curious about what happened to my family, that those conversations then typically come up as a result of it. Um, and I do have safe people. I have spaces where I process the pain. There are some hard days and some, challenging days. And that's where I have those opportunities, right, to embrace those vulnerabilities. And I do take care of myself, and am aware of my own capacity and when I'm sharing this deep tragedy with others. So I just wanted to highlight that. And, this experience have just made me really curious and just very determined how to understand how people survive trauma. And as I mentioned, I highlight this story as part of my healing journey because it's also part of advocacy and providing a culturally informed space, especially in the world that we live in right now.
Naree, thank you so much for sharing that, and I'm so sorry about your sister and all of that. I it's it's a lot to unpack, especially as a child, right? And so I thank you so much for sharing your journey, and it's interesting, to see kind of the way you came into mental health because, like you said, kind of understanding, oh, I'm living in two worlds, but then once you like really dig deep into it, and I think that's the beautiful
Mhm.
thing about therapy. I go to therapy myself, and I, it's kind of like the surface level, understanding
Yeah.
of like, this is why I'm going to therapy right now,
Yeah.
like this
Yeah.
is what's happening currently in my life, and then when you
Mhm.
get over that hurdle, it's like, oh, like there's something like truly inside that I need to overcome. I need to, unpack, and I need to unlearn, and all of these things. And so,
Mhm.
thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
This next question I want to talk about, as a first generation immigrant, what were some of the unique challenges you faced growing up that really shaped the woman that you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. As we were just talking about, before the podcast, right? Like being a first generation immigrant meant that I didn't have any access to any of this podcast or any type of spaces such as this, right? And it's amazing, with the work that you're doing right now because there's so much more access or accessibility to resources and, talks about mental health and being a first generation immigrant, it's like everything's completely foreign, right? Everything was not as accessible as it is today. So when I came to this country, at a very young age, I don't even remember much of anything besides just being an infant and just knew that my family came to this country as every stereotypical immigrant family, wanting to build a new life, right? And not only that, but we had to rebuild a life again after my sister then shortly passed away. So that was like another added layer to that trauma of coming to a new country. Um, not only that, but also growing up and then facing a lot of discrimination and getting bullied a lot and just a lot of racism going on. And, when my family was still trying to rebuild their life and seek stability, I struggle a lot, especially with just the relocation of finding, stable home to live, where I didn't have to continuously switch schools and find new friends and make new friends and trying to figure out like where to fit in and finding my sense of belonging. And that was the most challenging part of like just trying to navigate all of that. And the schools that I went to also, was mostly, predominantly white Caucasian students, right? And there was a lot of diversity. So with that, I was always separated and then segregated into like, other students that, um, either looked like me or, had, a special needs or some visible disability, right? That I never found a place that I could fit in and make friends, right? So it was definitely a very traumatic experience growing up as a child, after just losing their sister. And so that was something that I struggle with, as being a first generation immigrant. And not only that, carrying all the family responsibilities, as being the oldest daughter, one of the oldest daughter as well, because I have like five, six, other siblings as well. And I'm like the third oldest in my family. So I was expected to assume the role of the oldest siblings, leading my younger siblings, being a role model, navigating the academic systems that, often than not wasn't really built for me, right? And then also just suppressing a lot of emotional pain with everything that, I went through, my family went through. So there was a lot of weight that was being carried, as a first generation immigrant with family expectations. And it was very prominent, especially on my education, my career, through my behaviors of what I should do, how I should act, how I should dress, how I should present my family in the community. So I really carried a lot of that weight quietly. And again, it wasn't like we had podcasts that was easily accessible to talk about our stories, right? Or to help us share what's happening, with all these different expectations and roles that we have to continuously engage in this balancing act. So that was really, all the unique challenges, that I experienced. Not only that, there wasn't any language for mental health, right, growing up. So what I know now as what I went through, in terms of like complicated grief and like maybe post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD is that, just be strong, don't talk about it. The more we talk about it, the more grief we're going to feel and experience, the more we're going to feel overwhelmed, the more that we're going to get stuck in the past, instead of rebuilding our life, right? So it just felt really suffocating, to endure some of these challenges. And it just made me even more passionate about breaking those cycles, especially my work today.
That's so amazing that it didn't stop you from being, from continuing the, it's fine, we're not going to talk about it. Like it was kind of that fire starter for you to be like, actually, like this is going to change. Like this is not going to happen anymore. So, I love that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I feel like I see much more of that, in my role as a mom now
Mm.
versus when I was still single. And, when you become, a mom or a parent, you transition into that, there's like, it's such a different feeling in terms of like, when they talk about like, oh, you're gonna fight for your kids, right? And it's really that, it's like when you become like this mama bear, like you're fighting for your kids,
Yeah.
your kids' voices, and you're always advocating for them, where it's like, wow, I feel like I didn't do that for myself,
Mm.
and I need to do that for myself too. I'm doing so much
Yes.
for my kids, right? And
Yeah.
that's where that comes from.
Mm. Well, speaking of motherhood, this next kind of topic that we'll kind of explore, you've also spoken a little bit about navigating, the generational trauma and grief, and even your own um, personal mental health journey. How have these personal experiences really influenced the way that you show up as a therapist?
Yeah. It's really given me like a firsthand insight or lived experience, right, into understanding how early experiences or early life experiences or deep loss and grief and even the challenges of transitioning into motherhood can impact like a person's emotional well-being, their self-perception and how they relate to other people and just kind of their perception about the world around them. And, with my role as a therapist, we really dive into a lot with building emotional literacy. And I highlight that a lot, especially in my therapy spaces, because it's also part of this like generational pattern of trauma within my family, right? Because I didn't grow up in a household where mental health language was used in terms of naming our emotions and talking about our emotions. And that is a part of that like emotional pattern that I observed within my family of origin. So because feelings or emotions were really discussed in my family of origin, not because my parents didn't care, it's just because they also didn't learn it themselves either, right? And for them, productivity or performance is their way of just kind of surviving and kind of going through their day to day like hustle and bustle. And so then I learned how to kind of suppress my emotions, but I really had to unlearn that in order for me to be able to show up as a therapist, right, to help my clients build language, and build emotional literacy, and to naming their emotions, to tie it back to their experiences. So part of my healing journey involves a lot with learning how to identify and articulate my emotions, like really learning how to tune into my inner world, and saying exactly how I'm feeling, um, as part of the essential work that I do today with my clients as well. Is that, like, we can't heal if we can't name it, right? And that's very true. If you don't know what's going on, it's going to be hard for you to try to, like, dig that part of yourself. And so that was definitely one thing that I had to learn as part of the generational trauma, or pattern of what I had observed and learned through my family of origin.
Thank you for sharing that. I love that word, emotional literacy, because you hear about like financial literacy and like, things like that. And so to kind of put those two together, like it clicks for me at least. Like it makes it so that it's accessible for me. So I love that term. I don't think I've ever heard that term. So I love it.
Yeah, we just learned something new today.
Yes, I did. I did.
Yeah,
um
absolutely.
Nari, how has parenting neurodivergent children deepened your understanding of resilience, both in yourself and in your clients?
Yeah. Before I thought that resilience meant that I would just kind of push through no matter what, right? Just kind of staying strong, move fast. There's always a timeline or a deadline, and, really not allowing for anything to slow me down. And I always had this, like, academic, like, mindset also, with just, like, go, go, go all the time, not slowing myself down either. But motherhood really taught me something different in terms of, resilience. And that's really, really required for me to, like, slow down and meeting my kids where they are at with their developmental stages, and their pace. Because I have to honor their unique needs. And I can't expect that their developmental milestones is the same as mine or another kid, that is neurotypical. And that has really taught me to open my eyes to just kind of, like, not mold them to be who they're not, and really meet them to help them, to gently guide them through the different developmental stages that they're at. And as I mentioned before, becoming a mother also meant that, I am my kids' voice, right? I am their advocate, and I'm also their safe place. And that's what I really strive for in my relationship with my kids, because it's also my inner child, right? It's like what I didn't really get when I was growing up. And that's like, okay, I want to break out of that, because I knew how that felt like, with my parents working so much. And although they were working to provide for the family so that we didn't, fall behind, or so that we can get our needs met. And at the same time, it also wounded me in ways where I didn't feel a sense of security or safety in terms of, like, that emotional connection. And I wanted to help my kids build language and be able to, like, connect with me in ways that they feel safe, to come to me, talk to me if they were feeling unsafe, or someone was bullying them or talking down to them. Yeah, so a lot of flexibility, and thinking of new ways, and leading with a lot of love and connection, and being present with my kids has really, like, taught me to be in this phase with my kids. Um, this journey has also taught me to be even more compassionate in my work as well. So I understand just more of the deeper connection, with individuals that identify themselves as caregivers as well, when they come through my therapy space, right? Like, I understand the complexity of navigating the system that we're in, and a lot of times not built for my child or my family. And it's very frustrating. and there's just more empathy for a lot of invisible labor that sometimes goes unnoticed behind the scenes, and just this constant advocating that we do on a daily basis.
Yeah, quickly, Naree, could you
Mhm.
explain a little bit to listeners who don't know what does neurodivergent mean?
Yeah, so neurodivergent, is someone that, has a more unique brain in terms of how they see the world and how
Hmm.
they are able to relate to the world around them, such as socially, when they're building relationships with other people. Sometimes they might not have the appropriate words to be able to express their feelings or
Yeah.
needs.
Hmm.
And sometimes it might come off as a little bit harsh or a little bit aggressive, or maybe sometimes they might not have any language at all to speak, like my 4 year old, he's nonverbal.
Mm.
And the only way that he's able to communicate his needs is through his behaviors, and it has to be
Hmm.
outwardly behaviors, where sometimes he might hit himself, or sometimes he's laying on the ground, or sometimes he's like throwing things, in order to be able to get his needs met.
Yeah, thank you
So
for
being
sharing.
able to relate to their world at a much different pace
Hmm.
than a neurotypical
Yeah.
individual. Mhm.
Yes, yes. Thank you for sharing that. I was, as you were speaking a little bit, I was like, oh, maybe some folks might not know what neurodivergent means. So thank you for sharing
Yeah,
that
yeah,
little
absolutely.
definition there. Naree, I want to talk a little bit about your practice. So Untangled Minds LLC. Can you tell us a little bit about Untangled Minds? What makes your practice different, and what vision do you hold for the people that you serve?
Yeah, absolutely. So I created my practice a little bit over a year ago, because I created it because I was feeling really stuck within my career, within my professional development. I was trying to figure out like what I wanted to do. And I was trying to figure out like a path that would work for my work life balance, that would work with me to continue still being a mom to my kids as well, because they have different needs that I will need to meet them, and trying to figure out like the flexibility around that as well. And so as I was kind of going through that, it was really part of my own healing that I wanted to start the practice. I didn't see a lot of therapy spaces as well that, can offer, um, authenticity, as a person's of color, right? As a therapist of color that could fully show up, with multiple identities, such as like a grieving sister, a Southeast Asian woman, a mother, an advocate, and so I wanted to be able to like provide a therapy space that can offer, just kind of the complexity, and the different layers that, individuals might go through or might be facing challenges with. So in my practice, it's really relational, and that just means that it's culturally grounded, it's rooted in compassion. There's a lot of curiosity, a lot of collaboration as part of the process. One of the basic foundation that I typically do in my therapy spaces is building therapeutic alliance with my clients in order for us to be able to create safety, learning how to build trust, and learning how to offer individuals like choice and empowerment, and you know um, being in a space where they feel supported, right? And that's really what I really strive for in my therapy spaces, and then gently guiding individuals to untangle all the challenges that they face, and then reconnecting who they truly are, and who they want to be, how they want to show up.
And thank you for sharing that. That's so beautiful, and I love that you have a that's kind of the basis of Untangled Minds, because I, as someone who goes to therapy myself, I think I was shopping for therapists for a really long time because I was trying to find someone like that, someone who looked like me, someone who understood me. And so I feel it's so amazing to see now, specifically,
Mhm.
that there's so many Hmong therapists. I love that we have this space now, in our community, that
Yeah.
there are, Hmong people who are practicing. or who have practices and have their own spaces for therapy and all and mental health and all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love seeing all the things that other Hmong therapists are doing, the only downfall is being a Hmong therapist is that I know all the Hmong therapists, so I can't use any of the Hmong therapists for my
Oh,
therapy,
sure.
my therapy, right? So
Oh, I didn't even think
I have
of
to be
that.
really creative. Yeah, so I have to
Yeah.
be really creative in terms of like who I'm gonna seek support
Sure.
from because I've taken all the Hmong therapists in my corner and be like, "You're my friend. You're my friend."
Yes.
Um, and so it's much harder for
Mm,
myself as a Hmong therapist to gain that connection, in a therapy space with another Hmong therapist. So that's
mhm,
been I say that's been one of the challenges, as being a Hmong therapist, that although it's great that, now we have so much more than just one or two Hmong therapists,
mhm.
that can also be kind of a challenge, for us other Hmong therapists, right? Because we want to collaborate with everyone because it's such a
Yeah,
small community still.
for
So,
sure. Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah. I want to ask this next question. As a bilingual and bicultural therapist, how do you create safety and belonging for your clients who may have never seen themselves reflected in therapy before?
Yeah, so I really take time to build trust at the client's pace, as I mentioned before, right? So I really acknowledge that vulnerability can be really uncomfortable or even unsafe at first. So I'm really transparent about the therapy process, and I always encourage like feedback. I really honor like each individual's boundaries and their lived experience, and safety. Is something that I really harness and hold on to because I know how intimidating it is to come through a therapy space and not knowing really where to start and perhaps feeling overwhelmed by everything that they have to kind of share or share everything with, right? So representation in terms of like that safety, is really important for me, for us to begin with um, creating a space where they can be seen and heard and accepted exactly as they are, and being able to provide a space that is warm and nurturing and collaborative and judgment free, and again, like I said, being transparent, and not forcing someone into therapy to think that this is how therapy should be.
Thank you for sharing that. That's
Yeah.
so great to know, because I think there's I feel like, as the years go by, mental health and therapy is more openly accepted, and is very
Mhm.
much um, considered something good to help yourself. But it's great to know that, as you run your practice, it's really about being authentic and slow at a pace for your client to feel comfortable.
Yeah. And it's really not a space to come in like ridicule or shame, right? It's not shame
Mm,
based in any way. And I think that that's what sometimes there's some fear around that, especially when I'm working with like other clients who are Hmong or identify as Hmong individuals, where sometimes they come to the therapy space with this fear that, oh gosh, like they might know my mom, my dad, my uncle, my grandma. And then there's this like intertwine of like community connection there. And then
yes.
there's this fear of confidentiality, right? Or dual
Hmm.
relationships, and that is part of the collaboration and the transparency part of my process, to build a trusting, and safe relationship with that other person to say that, anything that they share with me, it's
Hmm.
confidential, and
Yeah.
even if they know my family or if I know their family, um, I don't go out there and like just start disclosing everything that they share
Yes.
with me, right? There's that privacy
Hmm.
that we have to uphold and honor.
Yeah. Yeah. This next segment, Nuri, I want to talk about community and
Yeah.
self-love group for girls. I absolutely love that you host a virtual self-love group for girls. What inspired you to start this program?
Yeah, well, this program came from the little girl in me who didn't have a safe space, right,
Oh.
talk about emotions, identity, or belonging. I didn't have a lot of like verbal affirmations from like that growing up, and it was just like work, work, work all the time, carry all these family responsibilities, do good, right? So I really wanted to give to young girls, a space where something I never had, a community that really says that your voice matters, your feelings are valid, your culture is powerful, and how can we form a supportive group together. And I specifically also chose the age range 15 to 17 because I also remembered being old enough to reflect in terms of like who I was becoming. It was like I was still stuck as a child, but then almost becoming an adult, but not an adult yet, right? So it's always like teetering, tottering, in terms of like going back and forth with being a kid and not yet an adult. And so this was kind of the time that I wanted to really highlight about certain tools and certain conversations or dialogue that we can have about peer influence, their sense of autonomy, as well as like identity formation and just kind of their emotional development overall, which is like their self esteem and confidence.
I love that.
Mhm.
I think it's so important, and those ages are so important. Like,
Yeah.
my younger sister is 15 right now, and she'll confide in me in certain things, and I'm like, oh, like I remember feeling, those feelings too, or um
Yeah.
it's normal to feel all of those feelings and everything like that. And I am the oldest, and so I similarly to you, I didn't have anyone to like be like that's normal, or just like the verbal validation. My family, same as yours, was just kind of surviving. And now that we've kind of shifted from surviving to kind of more of a stable lifestyle, I'm grown now, my middle sister is grown now too, so we kind of have that understanding, whereas my younger siblings are a little younger, and so we can kind of provide that validation that my mom and my grandmother might not always have a handle of being able to do. So yeah, I think I love it. I love that so much, and I have such a soft spot for younger girls too, just because same as you, I wish I had things like this, when I was growing up.
Yeah, I actually started this very early on when I was still in college, and I was part of the Women's Advocacy Council group as well as I minor in women's studies, and so I had started at that time. I had talked to like the women's um, what is it, the women's program director, and we had started like a high school group for Hmong girls at that time, and really just kind of form like a support group, with navigating through high school and how that looked like. And it was such a different time then because I remember like a few of the Hmong girls that I work with then were already married and were already navigating through that. And I was unmarried then. And so I didn't really know how to navigate that with them. So I knew that I needed more work, right? I knew I needed more work in being able to build more understanding, more knowledge, how to apply myself and what would be helpful to teach, and educate this specific group of girls, So I went back, and I did more, more work in school and learned more, got more experience under my belt, So now I'm coming back more stronger, knowing that, oh, I got this, and I can try to figure it out with them. So hopefully as I continue the trajectory of like building more of self-love support groups for young girls, that it resonates with them, that there's some takeaways from it.
That's wonderful. I love that so much. I want to ask, what do you hope the young Hmong girls gain from being a part of this space?
Yeah, so I hope that they gain self-trust, to honor cultural pride, and to build emotional literacy, because I know how much meaning that has, to make more sense of their experience, right? And also to know that, they don't have to choose, um, between who they are and who they want to be, or that they don't have to listen to people molding them how to meet certain expectations or standards, and that they can show up to be who they want to be.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love that message.
Yeah.
I want to step a little, or I want to step into this next segment and talk a little bit about representation and advocacy. And I know we touched base on this a little earlier too, but my question for you, in many Hmong households, mental health is kind of, still on that scale of like it's talked about and sometimes it's not talked about openly. What barriers do you see and how do you help break these walls down?
Yeah. So, um, although a lot of our parents, right, did what they could to keep us alive, and emotionally, it just meant like we had to hide our pain and not express vulnerability, right? So it left us in silence. There's a lot of shame based going on. This like survival mode that we have to self sacrifice ourselves through performance, and just kind of connecting in that way. And this unspoken pain really just doesn't go away, right? It just kind of passes down to the next generation. And part of my work is really to learn how to empower individuals to break that cycle, because we can honor a certain culture, heritage, and traditions, that are helpful and healthy. And at the same time, how do we start letting go of other culture messages or traditions that really weighs us down, right? And is not helpful, and it's actually harmful, right? So we need to start breaking barriers by first acknowledging them. And, by recognizing the truth in terms of, how often we've overlooked in silence some of these. And then from there, then we can start repairing. And repairing means that, it's more than just saying like I'm sorry or being apologetic, right? But it's about like addressing the harm done and tending to what's been wounded, and then rebuilding trust, right? And we have to take into consideration of taking accountability as well in order for us to truly rebuild. And by doing that, we have to be willing. Willingness, is very powerful in terms of like learning how to like take accountability, naming our stories, naming our truths and what's been harmful. Um, and, we also need to create spaces where our pain isn't shamed, right? And it's not ridiculed, or where we're going to fear that we're going to be made fun of, but we need to create spaces that are honored so that we can, you know, work on silencing ourselves through breaking these barriers.
And thank you for sharing that. Accountability has been top of mind for me because sometimes, we can be like you mentioned earlier, you can just say I'm sorry. But what does that sorry mean? Like what are the actions to not make this happen again? Or what are ways that you are going to make me feel like we're working on this together and things like that. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
mhm.
what are the actionable steps, right, that we can kind of undo some of what's been
Yes.
done and what's been
Yes.
wounded? Yes,
Yeah,
for sure. And
exactly.
that's part of that rebuilding trust.
Mhm. Mhm. Yep. My next question for you, what role does representation play, in encouraging our communities to really seek the help and embrace healing?
Yeah, representation, it's not just about like opening doors, right? But it's about like perhaps like building bridges, where, if a client or an individual see a therapist who looks like them and sounds like them, or perhaps has walked a similar path, it really helps to rebuild trust that perhaps was lost a long time ago. And for many individuals that come through like my therapy space, often than not, it's really the first place that they experience like a truly safe and non-judgmental relationship, which is really, really key component of the healing and growth process, right? So that's really how I view the role of representation in healing.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. We're coming down to our last couple of segments here. Nuri, I want to talk about you personally for a little bit, kind of your reflections and obviously some of your wisdom. What does healing mean to you personally?
Healing is a continuous journey of coming home to yourself, um, over and over to yourself, right? And it's really this process of restoring balance and wholeness after experiencing deep pain, trauma, or loss, especially after everything that I had witnessed and observed, with my personal tragedy within my family. It took a minute there, but it's never too late to start the healing process, right? As long as you are an active participant in that process and you're intentional about it. But you do have to really work hard at it. There will be some days where you will regress, and there will be some days where you're finding yourself like growing and thriving and glowing as well, right? And you have to acknowledge all those pieces, and that's also part of the healing process as well. Part of my healing has been building a lot of self awareness and, cultivating mindfulness a lot into my daily routine to really be aware of my actions and the words that I use and how it not only impacts myself, but the people around me as well, like my kids, my clients, my family members, my husband. And, the choices that I make, is um, how I want to show up, in terms of my healing, right? So it's about me understanding my past, and my personal history and really using that as an insight to shape my life rather than allowing it to just define me.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to take a moment and go back to what you said. Healing is coming back home to yourself, to you, right? And I literally, when you said that, I got chills and I felt like tears were gonna come down because that's so true. That spoke to me so. I don't know, it just spoke to me. So thank you for sharing that. And that's so beautiful. That's such a beautiful way to put it because when you said that, I felt like warmness, because when you are home, when you're in a safe space, you feel warmness, you feel
Mhm.
safe, you feel like you can be yourself. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one thing that I always talk about is like how much our body has been through different experiences, different trauma, and it's endured so much, right? And sometimes we don't recognize ourselves, and so when we keep on coming back to ourselves and at some point during our healing journey we're going to start feeling safe that it's okay for you to come back and be who you are, right? So that's why I talk about that.
Yeah, thank you. My
Mhm.
next question for you, I want to ask, looking back at your journey, as an immigrant, a mother, a therapist, and an advocate, what are you most proud of?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked because the other day actually I came across a quote and the quote read, if you want something you never had, you have to do something you've never done. And simply put, an example would be coming on this podcast. I would never in my life come into a podcast like ever. If you met me a year ago, I would have said no. And that's been part of my personality, right? That's just been part of my like hiding parts of myself, silencing parts of myself, and as I'm going towards this like inner work and healing, I'm like, why do I keep on doing that to myself, and um, part of myself is like, well, what do I have to lose anyways, right? Um, so I use this quote as a motivation to kind of help me, right, to continue the path of growth, instead of like resorting back to safety. So simply also put that I also get to design the life that I want to live, right, including places or people that deserves my peace and energy, understanding, and maybe reevaluating, reassessing, like, what do I need to let go of that no longer serves me? What do I need more of in my life, right? And so part of my proudest moments and journey is just acknowledging that my worth doesn't come from external validation, or that I don't need people to tell me who I need to be or how to act. And I get to choose my or rewrite my story and not carry stories that was never mine from the beginning, anyways. Um, Additionally, I'm proud that I'm in this role, because then my kids also get to grow up knowing that therapy is also normal, and that emotions are safe, and that we can talk about it without silencing them or invalidating them, and that their story also matters. And that's also really important for me too.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I'm so glad I didn't ask you last year. I'm glad I asked you this year to come on the podcast. Oh, that's
Yes.
beautiful. And that makes me so happy because I think it's so important. And I personally, as I kind of insert myself at these communities and these just like in these groups of having normal conversations about feelings and emotions and everything like that, sometimes I forget that it's still kind of taboo, I guess, to talk about your emotions and your feelings because, in my circles, we do it all the time. It's like normal, right? And then I'll step into other events or, see other people and I'll like ask a question and they're like, "Oh, that's an interesting question." And I'm like, "Oh, sorry." Like, but I also feel like it's put in me to have those conversations and to ask these people because maybe I am the only person that has asked them, "How are you really doing?" And or like, "How's it really going?" And so yeah, I love that you as a mom, you get to have those normal conversations with your children, because not only is it going to be normal for them, but it'll be great for them, in the future, because they'll get to have those conversations with their friends and kind of just move that needle a little forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you're going out there and initiating having those conversations, because when we talk about our emotions or feelings, it's like unfamiliar and it's very foreign, right? And that's why some people are kind of like, what are you asking me? Like, are you really asking me how I'm feeling? Or are you just going to ask me on the surface? Yeah, so it's really important to start initiating and breaking some of those cycles, right? To really get into like the deep rooted like emotions.
Most definitely, yes. My last question for you for this segment, what hopes do you carry for the next generation of Hmong women when it comes to self-love and mental wellness?
Yes. So I say stop apologizing for being sensitive, for being smart, for being loud, soft, strong, and so forth, right? Because we are fierce and full of love and full of energy. And that healing is not only possible, but it's their birthright. And as I mentioned before, honor culture messages and traditions that uplift us, and let go of messages that weighs us down and doesn't serve us.
Yes, period. I love it. I love it. Nuri, we're at the end of the episode here, but I do feel like we can continue having this conversation for hours and hours. Mental health is something that is so dear to my heart. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I have these, two core questions that I ask every guest that come on the episode. So my first question for you is, what does being a Hmong woman mean to you today?
So, being a Hmong woman today means that um, I'm like a bridge, right, between like the past and the future. And it means that I'm carrying stories of those who came before me, while also rewriting the ones still being written. And that's exactly where we are, right? So it just means that we're thriving and we're no longer just surviving. So that's exactly where we are at right now today.
That's so beautiful. I love it. I love it. And then my last question for you, for listeners, who want to learn more or connect with you, where can they
Mhm.
find you and your work?
Yes, so I have a website. You can check me out at www.untangledmindsllc.net. You can follow me on Instagram as well at Untangled Minds LLC. Um, or you can follow me on Facebook as well, and that is just Untangled Minds LLC.
Amazing. As always, listeners, links will be in the bio, description, all of that good stuff. So go ahead and give Naree a follow her journey, follow her page, all of that good stuff. Naree, thank you so much for sharing your powerful journey with us. Not just your career path, but your heart as well. Your work really reminds us that healing is not only possible, but it is a path for deeper connection with ourselves, our families, and our communities. So, to the listeners, may Naree's story inspire you to seek your own healing, embrace your own identity, and create spaces for those around you.
Thank you so much, Ariel, and for having me here today.
Yes, most definitely.